Hello, thank you for coming into our school. I'm La-Shaunda Gardener. And you are?
My name is Nora Jefferies.
Thank you for coming to talk to us today.
Pardon?
Thank you for coming to talk to
yes,
us today.
very interesting.
Nora, when and where were you born, and can you tell me a little bit about your family?
I was born in 1920 on Coventry Road, in what used to be Small Heath. I had an older sister, 10 years old, who really didn't want a baby in the family. In fact, I understand that one time she had to take me out, so she tipped me out of the pram, but I survived. But I have a mother and father and one sister.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Ordnau Road School, which went off the Coventry Road, until I took the 11 plus exam. And when I passed, in their wisdom, they decided to turn my school into a junior school, into a senior school, and I had to go across the road to St Benedict's School for the few months before I went to Camp Hill Grammar School.
Okay. And what was your first job?
When I left school, I had to have an interview at the council house with 5 councillors asking me questions because I'd taken what used to be the examinations, GCSEs, I suppose they were. They were not called
School certificates. Or, yes, something like that, yeah.
And so I eventually got a job in the estates department, which I hated. So I was only there for a year, and I applied for a job as a lab technician at HP Source. And I got the job because I'd been to Camp Hill.
What did the job entail?
We had all the ingredients coming in, the raw ingredients, and they had to be tested. The various products had to be tested at intervals, and then the final products had to be tested. So there was a lot of testing all the time to see that the quality was kept up. We made all sorts of things, sauces, and we produced yeast for the brewing industry, and pickles, of course, and vinegar. Vinegar was most important.
Was it unusual for a woman to be working in a lab?
It was quite unusual, but I had a chief chemist who was interested in the school I'd been to, and I think they wanted to liven up the situation, so they were gradually, but I was the only woman that did stay there.
What happened when the war started?
We were prepared in as much as it had been threatened. So we had things like blackout curtains, and there were shelters being put in gardens or in cellars. We had a shelter in our cellar. And then I joined the ARP, ARP.
Yeah,
And I went in an ambulance, and I remember going past, I lived on the Coventry Road, remember going past my house midnight one night, and my father was looking to see what was happening to me, and I sailed back in an ambulance on the way into the city. So that didn't last very long. So in 1939, I went to a church service, and at 11 o'clock we had the announcement that war had been declared. So I think we all expected bombs to drop immediately. But at first there was quite a lull. We had to make sure that our curtains were drawn and the houses were blacked out, no light showing. And we tried to carry on as much as we could for a few months. And then I had this conscription papers about 1940, 1941, and my firm held me for over a year because a couple of the younger men had been called up. So I was kept, but eventually they decided it was time for me to go.
What were the air raids like?
They were frightening because I lived on the main Coventry Road, which led directly to Coventry, which was badly bombed, and the bombers could come up the Coventry Road towards Birmingham. Well, unfortunately, we had an oil and petrol paint shop further up the road, and they dropped a direct hit on that. So there was a great fire, and that encouraged the other bombers to come. There was a lot of damage. The house next at the bottom of our garden was completely blown up to smithereens. They never found the bodies, they were just blown sky high. Our own house wasn't bombed, but we had a shelter in the cellar. My father had to go over to Moseley to do fire watching, so Mum and I were alone quite a lot of the time. But when the BSA was bombed, which was a factory quite near, there was great confusion. They couldn't get enough water. They had to drain Smallheath Park Pool to get the water. There were cables and water hoses all over the roads, and of course a great deal of damage. A house next door to ours, next door but one to ours, was set on fire. And I remember coming out and looking at it and thinking, what can I rescue if I had to go up? And all I could think of was the piano. How I was going to drag a piano out, I don't know. Anyway, my father was controlling traffic because everything was in confusion. We hadn't water for 3 weeks. We had to go up to Smallheath Station to collect water. And I had to go over to Aston to the lab, and I had to cycle through bomb damage and debris. So it was quite a difficult time. And of course Birmingham was badly bombed. Not only our area, but the BSA was so badly bombed, there were about 300 people entombed in the factory, and they'd never been taken out. They just sealed it up. So we had quite a... But it's not mentioned very much. I think Birmingham is backward at coming forward to how we suffered. Coventry was concentrated, as they called it, and was badly damaged. But a lot of damage was done to the ordinary houses, Smallheath, Aston and Nechells, that area. So it was a very hard time.
What happened next?
My father decided that it was unwise for my mother to stay. She'd had a bad time. She'd been in hospital, so Dad decided to move out. And one of the places we could go to was a little village, as it was then, which is very near between Birmingham and Wolverhampton and Cosford, the airfield. So we went to a new house, and we were there from 1940, 41 till 46. My mother didn't like it because there were only 2 buses a day back to civilization. So in 45 we came back to Birmingham, well, to Smethwick really, just outside Birmingham, where we still are. Well, I still am.
When were you called up?
I was called up in 40 and 41. I'm not sure of the actual dates now, but my firm held me for over a year, and finally I was called up, and I bought a card, I think, giving me instructions to go, and I had to have various interviews to decide. I had the choice of either going in a lab in a factory, which I didn't want to do, or to go into Land Army or the services. Well, I went off to a Land Army appointment with a horrid farmer who interviewed me, and I said I'd like to do growing things, gardening or farming. And he said, if a farmer wants someone to milk his cows or shoe his horses, that's what you will do. So I said, no, thank you. So then I decided I liked the Wren's uniform, very smart hat. Went to interview. Naval officer said, is your father in the Navy? No, my father was in his 60s.
Yeah.
So I said, no. Is your mother in the Navy, in the Wrens? I said, no. Oh, well, we don't really need you. We can get enough girls from the ports. And then there was the WAF. I didn't like their coloured last stockings. My father had been in the army, so I joined the ATS. And I was called up after a lot of arguments, and joined up in December the 18th, 1942, when it was bitterly cold, frozen everywhere, and I had a train to go to Northampton to my training centre.
What does ATS stand for?
The Auxiliary Territorial Service.
What did your training consist of?
Well, first of all, we had medicals, and I was A1. Then we had to queue up and collect uniform. And we look at the drawer whether it fitted. Some people had skirts down to their ankles. Some people had hats which just sat on top of their heads. So it all had to be sorted out, but that was the essential thing. We were then ushered into barrack rooms, tin huts, which had 24 beds, with one iron stove in the middle, which only burned coke, and we couldn't light it till 5 o'clock at night. Well, it was mid-December, then early January, and I don't know if anyone's ever tried to light a coke fire with nothing except paper. That was very difficult. And the poor souls who had beds near to the stove were unlucky because everyone else used to sit on their beds to be warm. After that, of course, we had selection tests to see what we were probably good at. And I wanted to be a driver, but they didn't accept me as a driver, and I learned years later why not. I'd come to that. And so I became a plotter, operations room at a searchlight battery.
Where was your first posting?
After 6 weeks training, when we were supposed to be young soldiers, and we knew how to dress, we knew how to fold the blankets and keep our barrack rooms tidy and so on, I was sent to a searchlight battery in Newark. And in the ops room, we were expected, well, we had to take phone calls from the airfields, which are a lot of them in the area, and any bombers that were coming our way, we had to have the height and direction, and then in turn we would phone it out to the searchlight sites so they could set their searchlights in the right height and direction to try and stop the bombers.
Was it ever dangerous?
We had 1 or 2 near misses, but we were near Lincolnshire, so there was a lot of activity, bombers coming over, aiming, of course, for the industry and for the ports. So we were on the alert the whole time. We had several sites around the area where the searchlights were being organised.
Okay. Yeah. Do you remember who you worked with?
I was in 370 Searchlight Battery, which was part of the 43rd Duke of Wellington's Regiment. So there are a lot of Yorkshire people in the battery.
Do you remember any of the people that you worked with?
We had a very I felt he was a very unpleasant major. I don't think he really liked girls coming in uniform. In fact, several of them didn't. The men didn't really appreciate having female soldiers. And he was arrogant. He was strutted around in his joggers and his riding jacket and walking in his stick. But we had 1 or 2 very nice officers who were very kind, and a RAC officer, ATS officer that was useless.
Did you stay at Newark all the time?
But I went on a course to be a PE instructor. I went on another one to learn the early days of radar, which was crawling around wet fields with a piece of wire and things. And then I went on an education course, and I was also sent to an officer training unit. But in those days, it's hard to believe now, I was a very shy and quiet person, and a lot of the officers were brought from the wealthy and the aristocracy and so on, that we ordinary folk didn't have much of a chance unless you were exceptional, which I wasn't. So I didn't succeed at that time.
What was your rank?
I went in as a private, as we all were, and then I became a lance corporal, and then I became a corporal. And there were some photographs I bought showing me with other trainees as a corporal. But we were quite important.
Did you stay at Newark for the whole war?
No, because the bombers weren't coming over so much, they'd established, the Germans had developed a rocket which was unmanned, and we called it a doodlebug. And they were coming over and no one had any idea when or where they were coming. So my regiment eventually was disbanded, and at 6 o'clock one morning we were all ushered into a train, and we went all round England and arrived in Kent about 2 a.m. to find that we were living in tents on Romney Marshes, and the male cooks had produced stew for us to eat at 2 o'clock in the morning, which didn't go down very well. But then the rockets were useful because instead of one gun sending off one shell to try and hit this little thing, 4 or 6 rockets going off, one was more likely to hit. Now the doodlebugs were frightening because we could hear them coming, and they had a little red light on their tail. And as they got nearer and nearer, we were all wondering what was going to happen, because when the red light went off, we knew the doodlebug was dropping, and then it exploded, you see, and caused a lot of damage. But we managed to shoot down quite a few on their way to London. But then that came to an end because the Germans perfected a much faster rocket, which did more damage, and it couldn't be seen. It came so quickly that it dropped before they realised they couldn't touch it.
I believe these rockets were called V1s and V2s. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
The V1s were the first, and both were unmanned, of course, there's no human in them. And the V1 had a little red light on its tail, and it came zooming. We could hear it coming nearer and nearer, and the idea was to get focus so that the guns could fire off and hope to hit them. We did hit several, obviously, but to stop them getting as far as London, which was the main thing. And the V2s, I know very little about, because we were on the move again then, because our rockets couldn't hit them. So they had to be dealt with in some other way, which I don't know.
When they started firing the V2s, what happened to you?
Well, they were preparing for the invasion of France, so they didn't know what to do with all operators that had been on the guns. And so first of all, I'd had a boyfriend at the time, and very tearfully we had to separate. He was going into France. I went to a holding unit in Brigstock, which is Lincolnshire, I think, somewhere. And we helped at farmers in the fields until they could sort us out, because there were hundreds of us, all from all over the country, who were no longer sort of necessary to fire guns, because the planes had stopped coming in any quantity. And from there, I was sent to Winchester to do a clerical job. And being an inquisitive person, I was sent to the records office, and so I found my records, and I discovered why I couldn't be a driver. And it said my mechanical instinct was not sufficiently developed. So in 1945 I took driving lessons and passed my test. So I don't know much about the selection test. From Winchester I went to one of the best training centres for recruits at Guildford. From Guildford I was sent up to Edinburgh, where I was there on VE Day, and we had a wonderful reception in Edinburgh. Then I was sent down to Leicester, which I didn't like, because the Leicester people by this time, like everyone else, was fed up with war, and they were not already VE Day, that's Victory in Europe Day. It was going on, but the Japanese war was still going on. So the Leicester people were not very friendly. I've never been back to Leicester since. And from there I went up to Stirling, and I had a little room in Stirling Castle. And then I went up to the Trossachs, the clerical. I went to Stirling, had an office job in Stirling, and I remember the panic because the Princess Royal, which was coming to visit the unit, and we were told to clear. I was in a room by myself. I was told to clear my desk, and I thought, this is a bit daft to have a royal coming to see me or visit the room with nothing on the desk. So against orders, I had some papers, and to my horror, she actually came up and wanted to look at the papers. So good job I had something handy. And from there, I went up to the Trossachs and did anything they could. I didn't really know by this time. I applied to go overseas, but there were too many people applying. So I was demobbed in 1946. So I'd done 4 years.
Why was VE Day special in Edinburgh?
Well, we were also thankful that war was finished, certainly in Europe. Several of us who had people in the Far East didn't perhaps think so much, but they made a great ceremony. We had all the troops, and there were Polish troops and artillery and RAF and the Bretons and ourselves, we all had marched along Princes Street, and we had a wonderful service in St Giles Cathedral, and people were cheering and clapping us. It was a lovely, lovely atmosphere. And we had dances in the evening, and we felt that life was improving.
What happened after you were demobbed?
Well, I had to go back. I would have stayed in the ATS because I enjoyed it. But my father had recently died, so I had to come back home to be with my mother. And I was very restless. I went back to the job in the lab and stayed there. But the chief chemist had become a director, and the one who took over I didn't like very much. He was very, what's the word I want? He felt a lot of himself, and he informed me that I had to call him Mr. in future. We used to call the men by their surnames, but in future with Miss Jefferies, I want to be called Mr. So that put a black mark against him straight away. So I stayed for maybe a year or a year and a half, and I applied for teacher training.
When did you meet your husband?
In 1950, and we had both joined the TA again. And so we were in different units in Birmingham, but we had social times together, and that's when I met him.
Did anything unusual happen to you when you were in the TA?
Well, it was interesting because we used to have weekends and various weeks of training in the TA. And once we were going up to Lancashire from Birmingham, Elmdon as it was in those days, and I had to have time off from school because we were going Friday lunchtime, and the girls and I assembled. We got on an RAF plane, and we were wondering what sort of plane it was, but the pilot said, "Oh, don't worry about your life belt, your life harness, because you wouldn't have time to put them on anyway." So off we set. When we got wherever it was, somewhere near Lancaster or on the coast, they couldn't, when we landed, they couldn't open the doors. So we had to clamber through the pilot's cabin and slide down the wings. So that was the RAF. We were not very impressed.
What was your highest rank in the TA?
I was commissioned, and then I became a lieutenant. And I was, my papers there, I was put on the reserve in 1956.
Right.
Then they wrote to say I wasn't needed, so they took me off the reserve.
What did your husband do during the war?
He was in a field regiment, that is when they pull the guns with them, they're not static. And he was in Dunkirk. He went over in 1940 to Dunkirk. And he was chased out, of course, and he was on the beaches for 6 days. He got on one ship, and they were about to leave, and it was bombed, so they had to swim back to the beach. And he eventually got home, and then they sent him to another artillery unit and a horse artillery. And then in their wisdom, they sent them over in another light field regiment to India and then Burma. So he was in the 14th Army in Burma and had a hard time. He wasn't a prisoner, but I believe he came back like a skeleton, like so many of them did.
When did you get married?
I was engaged in 52, and we were married in 55.
Where did you teach?
I taught in secondary schools in Birmingham. Moved around from Harborne to Edgbaston, and finally to, when they became comprehensive, to George Dixon's as it was then.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us. I really enjoyed listening to your story.
Well, thank you for being so patient, but I thoroughly enjoyed remembering all this, but dates get confusing, you know, after so many years. But it's been most enjoyable and not as frightening as I thought it would be.